After 12 years of planning and prepping, the 22nd FIFA World Cup is underway in Qatar. But the lead up to it was far from smooth. Fans, footballers, and rights groups condemned Qatar for its human rights record. Meanwhile, Qatar and FIFA called out these Western entities for what they saw as hypocritical criticism. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Data Point. Today, we're going to break down all the controversies surrounding this year's World Cup. There are three main issues that have been in the spotlight: Qatar's treatment of migrant workers, women's rights, and LGBT rights. In the months leading up to the tournament, the focus on these issues really sharpened, but let's start at the beginning. In 2010, Qatar won the bid to host the World Cup. On one hand, this was a historic moment. Qatar is a small nation in West Asia, and it's the first country in West Asia to host the tournament, and it's the only country in all of Asia to do so alone. On the other hand, there were practical issues like Qatar's lack of infrastructure, the extreme heat, and the actual size of the country itself. And lingering over all of this were, of course, its human rights issues. Qatar already relied on migrant workers for its development needs, but to tackle the practical issues with hosting the World Cup, this reliance deepened. Qatar had to build 7 new state-of-the-art stadiums and refurbish an existing one. They had to build roads and metro stations and hotels to basically create a new mini-city just for the games. They spent an estimated $220 billion, making this the most expensive World Cup to date. According to Amnesty International, there are 1.7 million migrant workers in Qatar who make up over 90% of the workforce. Qatar's government said that 30,000 migrant workers were hired just to build the stadiums, with most of these workers coming from Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and the Philippines. These laborers face widespread abuse and mistreatment. According to Amnesty, laborers who built the Khalifa Stadium and the Aspire Zone faced expensive recruitment fees, appalling living conditions, were lied to about their salary or faced delayed salaries, were not allowed to leave the stadium or camp, couldn't leave the country or their jobs, were threatened, and some were even subject to forced labor. An investigation by The Guardian revealed that 6,500 workers from India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka had died since 2010, which is when Qatar won the bid. They said the actual figures are higher, considering that data on workers from other countries like the Philippines was not collected. The most common cause of what is termed a natural death is acute heart failure or respiratory failure. But this doesn't recognize the underlying cause, which explains why Qatar said that
6,500 workers did not die on World Cup stadiums. If we're looking at specifically at World Cup stadiums, we have had, unfortunately, 3 work-related deaths and 35 non-work-related deaths.
A global poll by YouGov, commissioned by Amnesty, found that 73% of adults in the 15 countries surveyed would support FIFA compensating migrant workers who suffered during preparations. Interestingly, out of the 15 countries surveyed here, only 4 are non-European countries: Kenya, Mexico, Argentina, Morocco, and the United States. The most support, 93%, came from Kenya, and Kenyans make up a significant part of Qatar's migrant worker population. The poll results also found that 67% of those surveyed want their national football associations to speak out publicly about Qatar's human rights issues and to support the call for compensation. And some did do that. 10 European footballing associations, including the UK and Wales, issued a joint statement calling on Qatar to support and honor its human rights commitments. Beyond migrant worker rights, women's rights and LGBT rights have also been causes of concern. Homosexuality is illegal in Qatar, and a major concern for LGBT fans who wanted to travel to the country. One openly gay footballer from Australia spoke out about his own safety concerns, after which the tournament's organizer responded saying,
"I would say that on the contrary, we welcome him here in the state of Qatar. We welcome him to come and see even prior to the World Cup. Nobody feels threatened here. Nobody feels unsafe here."
As far as women's rights go, Qatar does have restrictive laws in place. Although Qatar has equal pay laws, it ranks 133 in economic participation and opportunity in the World Economic Forum's 2022 Global Gender Gap Report. Under health and survival, Qatar is in the bottom 5 at 142. The Political Empowerment Subindex ranked Qatar 143. When compared to other World Cup hosts, Qatar's Human Rights Index ranks it the third worst in the World Cup's history. The VDEM Institute's Human Rights Index quantifies the human rights record of a country where 0 indicates least rights and 1 indicates most rights. The index measures the extent to which people are free from government torture, political killings, and forced labor, have property rights, and enjoy the freedoms of movement, religion, expression, and association. For example, in 2006, the World Cup was held in Germany, which scored 0.97 on the index that year. For Qatar, the 2021 figures have been considered since the 2022 numbers are not out yet. Qatar is only behind Argentina, which hosted the World Cup in 1978, and Italy, which was the host in 1934. The military regime, which was in power in Argentina in 1978, suppressed civil rights and restricted freedom. In 1934, the Second World Cup took place in Benito Mussolini's Italy. With all this in mind, it isn't too surprising that Qatar has been under fire, but FIFA has stuck by its decision. Just before the tournament started, FIFA President Gianni Infantino issued a statement asking the 32 football associations to, quote, now focus on football, unquote, instead of politics. And even though this triggered even more backlash, FIFA and Qatar remained undefeated. The day before the World Cup began, Infantino called out what he described as the West's hypocrisy and racism.
I think for what we Europeans have been doing in the last 3,000 years around the world, we should be apologizing for the next 3,000 years before starting to give moral lessons.
Now, the history of colonization aside, Europe obviously has issues of their own. For example, a report by the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights found that the 237 adult migrant workers in Europe that they spoke to faced widespread abuse, including little to no pay, unsafe working conditions, and threats by their employer. Infantino also brought up Europe's immigration policies and the profits that European companies have made from Qatar and other countries in West Asia. Qatar's Deputy Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, actually addressed this last point in an interview with a German newspaper. He said, quote, on the one side, the German population is misinformed by government politicians. On the other, the government has no problem with us when it comes to energy partnerships or investments, unquote. Let's unpack this a little. We took a look at how much coal, oil, and natural gas was imported in 2021 by the 10 European footballing countries that released the joint statement that I'd mentioned earlier. Together, these nations spent $4.2 billion on importing mineral oil and fuel from Qatar in 2021. Qatar was also among the top 10 sources of oil for England and Belgium last year. And as for the protests, now that the tournament is underway, the chatter has also settled down. Captains of several European teams were planning on wearing One Love armbands in support of LGBT rights. But when FIFA said that they would, quote, impose sporting sanctions, unquote, if the captains wore the armband, they quickly backtracked. France's captain, Hugo Lloris, said...
Personnel, et ça rejoint un petit peu celle du président. Lorsqu'on est en France, lorsqu'on accueille des étrangers, on a souvent l'envie qui se prête à nos règles, qui respecte notre culture, et j'en ferai de même.
Which is a major shift in tone from just a few days ago. And although the Australian team released a video condemning Qatar's human rights records, they're still participating in the games. Clearly, despite all the controversy, for players, fans, managers, and sponsors, football remained the goal.